Well, greetings and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Cade. My name is Kristen Young. I am your host. I'm the communications coordinator with the Cade Foundation. And I'm excited to have yet another amazing guest, Dr. Shruti Malik. She is out of one of the Virginia offices, the Arlington, Virginia office for Shady Fertility. So welcome, Dr. Malik.
Hi, Kristen. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. We are excited. Shady Grove is always such a major supporter of the Cade Foundation, and we are so grateful for you and your team. And you guys are just awesome. And I know. So today we are going to talk about freezing eggs. Things often become popular when you hear certain celebrities talk about different processes they've been through or thinking about or going through. And I know freezing eggs is nothing new, but some people still just aren't quite sure what that process looks like. So first of all, if I want to freeze my eggs, what is a good age range to kind of make that decision?
Sure. So egg freezing, also one of my favorite topics to talk about for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into later too. But the ideal range for egg freezing is usually women who are between the ages of 30 to 38. And it doesn't mean that, someone who is, outside of that range couldn't consider it. I had a patient who I spoke with just last week who had a history of early menopause in her family. And, her mom and her sister went through menopause in their 30s and she was 26 or 27. And so she was concerned. And so for good reason, she wanted to have that discussion, which is great. And some women who are even a little bit older than 38, 39, if they've got really good ovarian function, sometimes it may still be worth talking to their doctor about. So, but ideal is around 30 to 38.
Okay. And just kind of in general, what does that process look like? Is this an ongoing? Was this just a one day outpatient process? What does that look like?
It's not a one day outpatient process, but it's a lot easier than I think the impression is for most women. Most women, I think, assume that we have to kind of block out and stop our entire lives for months at a time to do an egg freezing cycle, and that's really not the case. And I think it's good to kind of get that out there. Usually with the egg freezing process, the way that we structure it here at Shady Grove Fertility is when someone calls in and says, "Hey, I want to talk to a doctor about egg freezing." We will have them actually do some basic testing to look at ovarian function first. And that's usually a combination of some blood work and some ultrasound testing around the beginning of a woman's cycle. So the coordinator will have them coordinate that appointment. And then the second appointment that they have will actually be a meeting with the doctor. And by the time we have that second meeting, we have the results from that individual's testing. So instead of having just kind of a very general conversation about egg freezing, I can actually tell patients, here are what your results look like, and go through that. So that all happens kind of before the actual egg freezing process. And sometimes we might say, hey, everything looks fantastic. And someone might decide that egg freezing isn't necessary for them at this time. But a lot of the time we may decide that we want to move forward with that process. If we do move forward with egg freezing, usually what it involves is around 10 to 12 days of taking medications, usually hormone injections, and coming in maybe about 5 to 8 times during that window for ultrasounds and blood work. So we can see how everyone's responding, because everyone's going to respond slightly differently. But most of the time when you come into the office for us to see how you're responding, it's early in the morning. It's usually before you go into work. So it's not something that is likely to interfere with your schedule. And so a lot of women are going to work, right after they come in for their appointment. And then after we've, been able to see that the eggs are growing and we're able to do the actual process to take the eggs out and freeze them, then that day, that procedure is an outpatient procedure. It's very quick. But that's probably the day that you actually need to take off from work. There's no heavy lifting. You probably want to stay home and curl up on the couch with your Cade cup or so forth and, relax that day. But yeah, it's definitely a lot easier and a lot more streamlined than I think the impression is for a lot of women.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, of course, we gotta address the money question. We gotta address the money question.
Mhm.
So one, is this a process or procedure that is generally covered by insurance? And two, what is the general price range for egg freezing?
So I will say, sadly, not a lot of insurances will cover egg freezing because
Mhm,
unfortunately, it's still viewed as an elective procedure in most cases.
mhm,
Not the case for everybody. There are, some companies that are very progressive in terms of their coverage policies and are
mhm,
actually covering egg freezing or fertility treatment to some extent, kind of able to use for whatever you'd like. So we have a financial team that will actually sit down and verify if you have coverage or not, so you can make
mhm.
that decision. But if you don't have coverage, egg freezing might start at around $7,000 to $8,000
Okay.
for like a cycle of egg freezing. And usually, when I say that, that covers ultrasounds, blood work, the actual process to take the eggs out, to freeze them, everything.
Got it.
Medications might be another few thousand on top of that,
Mhm,
depending on the individual. So, some women who are really young may not need a lot of medications, and so they'll kind of go on the low end of that. Um, there are also programs that we have, and every center is a little bit different, but we have certain programs in place for women that have relatively good ovarian function. We have set programs that offer a guarantee of freezing at least 20 or 30 eggs. Um, and if it takes one cycle to freeze those 20 eggs or 2 or 3 cycles, you pay one set cost to freeze that set number of eggs. So it kind of allows the process to be a little bit less open-ended and
mhm.
usually financially ends up being a little bit less expensive than doing multiple cycles. Um, and like I said, every clinic might have different programs, but those are just some of the ones that we have.
Got it. And then what does that look like as far as how long we can freeze them, store them? Do they, is there an expiration date on frozen eggs?
So, to our knowledge, no. So, the best part about egg freezing is that it really allows us to freeze our fertility potential where it is right now. And so, egg freezing is not a guarantee. But, for someone who is 32 and freezes their eggs at 32, but may choose to wait until they are 36 or 37 to have a child, they have the option of coming back and using those 32-year-old eggs.
Mhm,
Um, and so, there's no expiration date on the eggs per se. The success associated with egg freezing is based off of when the eggs were frozen, not when they're used.
mhm.
So that's, really the biggest takeaway. The other thing that's really important to know, and actually, I think my father asked me this before. He's like, well, if you freeze someone's eggs, and lots of people have asked me this, but the most comical was when my father asked me. He said, well, if you freeze all of the eggs, or if you're doing IVF, then they don't have any eggs left. And I was like, no, actually, not the case. We don't hurt our fertility by egg freezing. There's no evidence to suggest that there is any decline in fertility that happens more so with that, or any significant increase in cancer risks and things like that as well. So it just allows us to take the eggs that would otherwise be lost and freeze them. So, for example, if a woman has 15 or 20 eggs that her body could grow and develop in a single month. If she is having regular cycles, her body might ovulate one of those eggs, and then the other 19 would end up getting broken down by the body and are lost. But if we freeze eggs, we can stimulate, hopefully, all 19 or 20, however many there are. We stimulate them, take them out of the body, and freeze them. The next month, she's going to have another group of eggs, probably a similar range, that have the ability to grow and develop in the next cycle. So those other ones would have been lost anyway. So we're not hurting her fertility by taking them out.
Love it. I love it. And I thank you for breaking that down because that was actually new information for me as far as that process. So I appreciate that. But I know you just mentioned that your father asked you about freezing eggs. And I know you have a personal story with freezing eggs.
I do have a personal story about freezing eggs. So, um, And this was when I was in fellowship. So when I was kind of in my fertility training, I had actually just exited a relationship. And, and as a lot of us, of course, the best laid plans always, we fall on our face, right? So, in my head, I had projected, okay, this is when I'm going to get married. This is when I'm going to have kids. And obviously then that whole thing imploded. And so, I said, okay, well, I don't really want to necessarily make any plans dependent on anyone else. I want to, just look at this. I want to have a family. I know I want to have a family, and so we started talking about egg freezing. And ironically, at the same time, two of my other colleagues that I was working with at the same time, we all decided we were going to get our ovarian function test, which is actually a very unnerving process because even when especially when all of the things about it, you're kind of scared to get those results back because you don't know what they're going to be. Um, and so we all got our ovarian function test. We actually all ended up getting our eggs frozen at some point in time over the course of that year.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was just so happy to do it. And it was funny because for me, I talk to patients all the time about it. But the first time that I actually had to give myself a shot, this was the first time I ever gave myself a shot of anything. It's a very unnatural process, even for a physician who's never done it. So it probably took me a good 10 minutes to psych myself up to actually inject myself with medication.
Mm-hmm.
It got a lot easier after that. But I say that because, the process can seem overwhelming. I think a lot of women are scared to get the results because they're worried about what they're going to mean. But I wouldn't worry about what the results are. The only way that we can actually act on any of those is by knowing. And one of my friends, her ovarian function was actually a lot lower than she ever would have expected. And she ended up freezing her eggs, and now she has two beautiful children from those eggs. And
Love it. Love
if
it.
she hadn't frozen them, it might not have happened. So I mean, it's good to
Mhm.
have that information. Information is power. It's, and it's really helpful to have. And so I would always encourage you to do that. And even for a physician, it is still a little bit anxious, for anyone else to be on the patient side of things. So it was, you know, nerve-wracking for me at first, but I am so, so glad I did it. And then I had, a nice group of eggs that I was able to freeze and keep. Um, and when I ended up meeting my husband, actually on our second date, this is entertaining. On our second date, yeah, I had told him on our second date, I was like, I literally, this is maybe a little bit forward, but I was like, I'm really only interested in, a relationship. I don't have time. I'm busy. I don't have time to like do all of this if this isn't going somewhere. So if that's not where your attention is, or if you're not even seriously considering it, I don't have time for that. I have my eggs frozen and, I'm going to move forward. And he actually thought it was hilarious. He loved it actually. Um, but
Must
and
have.
again,
He's your husband.
and yes. So, but again, it was definitely one of the best decisions I ever made because it was so empowering to at least know that I was going to make those decisions on my own time. And I was going to move forward with building a family when I was ready to build a family.
I love it. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, really quick, as I said, unfortunately, we are officially out of time. So, Dr. Malik, if you have any resources that you want to share or contact information that you want to share,
take a look at the Shady Grove website at shadygrovefertility.com, and you can look at, there are a number of physician authored pieces by myself and other physicians in the practice about egg freezing, about a number of topics. So it's a great source for solid information.
so the last thing is this is Coffee with Kate. So, what is in your cup?
So I have water in my cup, mostly just because I'm really thirsty. But this is my favorite Cade cup because it has like the really cool handle and it's unique. And it's got like my fun green, neon green interior. So this is
Yes.
my favorite cup. So